It's so nice to see so many of you. I realise now how few of you bother to drag your asses out to a Doc Martin screen.
That's a good opening.
Yes, exactly.
Who wants to go first?
Hello, I'm Richard Barber, freelance. If I read this correctly, Mr. Barnes, you didn't want your book made into a television programme.
Not at all.
Can you say why?
No, I did not want my book.
Oh, double negative.
Yes. Well, I thought you were pointing to something that said that I didn't want it made into
Well,
a
I thought
television.
perhaps I misread it.
No. I welcome all approaches for film, television, radio, book for the blind, anything. But I also recognise that once it changes art form, it has to be different. So I trust those who adapt it and change it. And all the differences I noticed in this first episode from my book all seem to be extremely positive.
That must be music to your ears there, to hear that.
Yeah, there was some tough decisions about, you're adapting a book as great as Arthur and George, the thing that keeps you up at night is what you leave out, because in an ideal world you'd leave none of it out, but you have to. So that's the sort of the hard part of adapting, I think it's great.
Played our Radio Times. Julian, can you just outline the kind of key differences as you see it between your book and your original vision and what we've just seen? What the kind of key differences and points of comparison?
Well, some people said that the book was completely unadaptable. It's 500 pages long for a start. It's got great chunks about spiritualism. It has a narrative structure in which the two main characters live their lives separately, cross once, then live separate lives again, and then meet at the end of the wedding. So in terms, it has its fictional structure. I think holds together in a novel, but it couldn't possibly hold together over 3 one-hour episodes. So a lot of the early stuff has to be stripped away. A lot of the of the growing up. They obviously have to meet in the first episode. It wouldn't make sense for them not to meet until halfway through the second episode, and so on. So it's partly a sort of a rationalisation for a visual medium of the narrative. And it's also, you write a book. The book's written in quite short chapters, and you're aware as you're writing it that the reader is likely to lay it down and go to sleep at this point, and so on. Whereas it's watched completely differently from how it's written. It's a substantially different medium, and one should salute that and all the changes.
Mr. Miles, there was a course on there, there was a case a century ago. How did you stumble on it? And indeed, Philipa, did you know about the case or read the book, or how did that come about?
I read the book, and that's how I knew. I don't think many people did know about the case. I mean, maybe from the area, but I don't think it's...
Well, I came across it, funnily enough, I was reading about the Braithwaite case, the famous late 19th century case, where an army officer, Jewish army officer, was sent to Devil's Island as a result of faked evidence, fake documents, racial prejudice, and so on and so forth. And this book I was reading about Dreyfus' case started off, funnily enough, by going through all the parallels between the Dreyfus case and the Adelgee case, and saying, why have we never heard of this, of the Adelgee case? And it said, the Dreyfus case was about treason. It was a treason trial, whereas this was about animal ripping. On the other hand, the British are rather more shocked by animal ripping than treason, so it's surprising it wasn't being heard of. And I thought, well, this must be a very well-known case, particularly as it involved Conan Doyle, and that therefore there must be several books about it. I went off to try and read one, and there wasn't one. There wasn't a single book about this case. There was a collection of Daily Telegraph articles reprinted. There was a half chapter in every single Conan Doyle biography. And I thought, well, if there isn't a book, I'll write my own. That's how it started.
Tim Dan from Television Magazine. I was just wondering how you managed to acquire the rights to the book and bring it to ITV as well. So what was the process of acquiring the rights? Was it a difficult process?
Well, these things always take time, and I read the book when it came out, absolutely loved it, and always in the back of my mind thought it would just make the most fantastic adaptation. And obviously in my head I wanted 20 hours to do a very faithful adaptation of the book, and you don't get that, certainly not in this country, or we couldn't do that. But it did take a while to get the rights, and then after I got the rights, then obviously the process of finding a writer, found Ed, and we wrestled for quite a long time about how to adapt it, and that was the biggest challenge really. I mean, it really took a couple of years, well, at least a year, didn't it? And we did actually do one adaptation which was much more faithful to the book, which was George and Arthur, but it actually wasn't really very television, and so that's when we had to sort of rethink it.
Yeah, I mean the novel is long and complex, and I think with the screenplay, especially when you have ITV 3 hours, it's 2.25 hours of actual screen time, you've really got to kind of find one heart. And I think once we hit on the sort of core of Arthur's motivation, which is sort of, I always like stories where you sort of something happens to a character here and it bounces up there, you know, and the idea that he's so grief-stricken and so guilt-ridden about his wife and his relationship with Julian, he sort of seeks this challenge, this mission to sort of exonerate himself, but he doesn't even realise that's what he's doing. And once that's absolutely there in the book, but it's sort of quite deep into the book, and so we sort of, once we had that as a solid part, we sort of felt around that, and then it became sort of obvious which bits of the book sort of adhered to that core, and which bits we would, you know, regretfully have to leave, and then you have something which is sort of unified, and you're not trying to cram in, because obviously 500 pages into 2.25 hours, you know, do the math, as Americans say.
Hi, Tim Oglethorpe, freelance. Question for Ed. Do you reach a different conclusion to Julian's book? Is there a different ending? And when you were, well, no.
Yeah.
Okay, but when you were investigating it and researching it, bear in mind not a lot has been done in this book apart from by Julian on this story, not a lot apart from by Julian. Did you find anything revelatory that was fresh and that you were able to put into the story?
Well, it's about Julian who's researched his novel is you know, we sort of fed off of the screenplay, and essentially the explanation, I suppose you could describe as inconclusive and complicated, and we arrived at a conclusion that was more conclusive and less complicated.
So a definitive conclusion.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
More conclusive.
Yeah.
Which
Thank
is
you.
fine. You know, I mean, my book is a novel, and novels often end, as life does, inconclusively, whereas Monday night ITV drama series can't end like that. You know?
Yes, in Martin Telegraph. Hello, just a question for everybody, really, particularly for Martin, Philipa, and Ed, and Julian on it as well. Just watching that now, it very much comes across as a, you know, it's a mystery story. There's a, you know, we have the detective, obviously there are parallels with Sherlock Holmes and all that. What I wanted to know was if it plays as well as it looks like it's going to, if it goes down as well as it does, is there an opportunity to take it beyond Julian's book? Is there the opportunity for a sort of Sir Arthur investigates thing to run?
Well, it hadn't crossed our mind before. Drop that down now.
we just say that to do the adaptation, and we'll let we'll see what.
Yeah, it's good for television to have returning dramas. We all know that, and there are other cases that he did look into.
But Julian needs to write.
Which Julian quickly needs to jot down.
Quick 500-page novel in 3 months.
But yes, it would, I would think it'd be fun to revisit. Who knows? It's all performance related, so we'll have to see.
Yeah, freelance. You talk a
Well, it is because it's not Doc Martin really, which is what I generally for the last few years I've done a bit of Doc Martin and then petted some animals in a documentary or something, and it's really nice and cosy and comfortable and known. And I'm terrible about thinking I'm about to do another thing that will be a departure and then bailing out at the last minute because I get scared or I don't think it's going to be any good or whatever, and just sort of stay either at home or doing the work that I'm lucky enough to do. But so if it hadn't been my own wife asking me to do it, I probably would have done a runner. But I didn't want to lose face. The accents, yes. What about it? It's Scottish. No, never. No, they're quite elusive. And I mean, I know Scottish people, and I would spend a lot of time. I've got Scottish horses. Yes, they speak a Scottish. Sadly not. No, they were no help. It's just pinning it down because he wasn't Glasgow. He was East Coast. East Coast, not West Coast, and I think we're mainly exposed to West Coast accents down here. It's too nice on the East, they all stay up there.
Sorry, just
Chris Shackleton, We Express. Obviously, Conan Doyle's work is going through kind of a phase of a very popular phase, but I mean, even though this is a completely different breed, the book and the show is about his life. But I was wondering, was there any sort of, when you first started doing it, was there any trepidation? Obviously, when you work, at the same time, there's shows like Sherlock and there's Guy Ritchie's Sherlock Holmes film. Was there any trepidation of how you create something as unique as this? How you go about doing it?
Well, actually, it's really interesting because when I started work on this, and when I first read the book, it was before any of the Sherlock revival. I think it was even Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah, 2005 the book came out.
Yeah, and I just always loved Sherlock Holmes. I've always been interested in Arthur Conan Doyle. So one of the reasons why I loved the book was because I've always had a particular interest in it. And then gradually, as these things do take years to come to the screen, all the Sherlocks came out, which was really interesting. It was just a coincidence.
But also, I don't think there is. You say there is a lot of interest in them now. I think there always has been. My cousin Jeremy did all of them over however many years at Granada, and the books still sell. I think it's an evergreen, and there's so much confusion in the world about was Sherlock Holmes real, or was Conan Doyle real, or was one of them Prime Minister? Or literally, there are. You ask any London cab driver about Sherlock Holmes, and they've heard it all from visitors from overseas coming expecting to see Sherlock Holmes, the Prime Minister. And so when I was telling people with anything about, two people said to me, because of explaining that we were making something about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who was the author of Sherlock Holmes. He said, right. So is Benedict Cumberbatch going to be in it? That's what you're doing.
Yeah, and I mentioned to somebody that I was doing it, and they said, so you'll spend a lot of time filming in Baker Street. So get very...
Which is, I guess, because they're both historical figures now, aren't they?
Yeah.
But there was sort of confusion at the time, even, because when Conan Doyle was shocked by the fact that when he sent Holmes over the Reichenbach Falls, he saw young men in the city wearing black crape around their hats in mourning for this character who had never existed in the first place. Astonishing.
And I think it's also easy to forget in these days that Conan Doyle was a big celebrity, wasn't he, at the time? I mean, he was very, very famous.
Yes.
And there weren't that many very famous people at that time.
No, and writers at that point had much more, well-known writers had more, how can I put it, they were also social and political figures in a way that they no longer are, it seems to me. So people like Conan Doyle, H.G. Wells, Bernard Shaw, Kipling, most of them march into number 10 Downing Street and argue about conscription or foreign policy and stuff like that. Whereas we turned up, we'd been sent down the back.
And also, I think that's one of the reasons where, in the book, one of the things I loved about the book was exploring that Conan Doyle really did think that he could change this because he was so important. And actually, he couldn't. Well, he did. He obviously did help, and he did really help George, but he didn't manage to get quite the response that he thought he would get.
It's interesting you mentioned the word trepidation, because in that scene where the trial judge says to him, you know, you pursue this, you'll be judged by Sherlock Holmes' high standards. I think that's one of the sort of interesting things, is that he's competing with his own creation, and the kind of the sort of hall of mirrors of that is just fascinating, and we'll explore that more in the subsequent episodes. So the sort of, I think we sort of welcomed it, and the sort of bottom line is that he's a very different person to Sherlock Holmes. You know, he's in some ways more like Watson. He's friendly, abundant, passionate, and very and the sort of the folly, I suppose, of applying a Holmesian kind of mindset to reality, to a real case, to a real mystery, is kind of a big part of where the story's going. How it doesn't really apply, and the sort of shock of that, and the limits to how far his celebrity will go. You know, he essentially overplays his hand.
I was wondering about the location. A lot of us like those things to film that was such wasn't it?
Yes.
How did that go? Filming?
Quick. It was quick, and looking upwards. But it was it was really exciting. But we mainly film in Cornwall, don't we? To come out to London on Sunday mornings. That was a Sunday morning, wasn't it? We shot in Trafalgar Square. We shot a bit of that and had a horse-drawn double-decker bus that was the real thing, and it was great, really lovely. And how you realise how just a few carriages and a few ladies walking down the street in costume and painted out the yellow lines, and because a lot of the buildings we were filming against were much older than the story, you got a real. I loved it. I loved seeing the carriages and
We were very fortunate too, because we went back to the Museum, which was a living museum really, where they'd recreated the buildings, taken from various places in the Black Country and put them in into one place. So that was really helpful, because there's nothing like that, of course, down here.
No, we looked at Great Worley.
Great Worley, I'm afraid, was very, very sad.
Well, the church is still good. The church is exactly as it was, and the church was fairly new when the case happened, so it was a spanking new church, about 20 years old. And I went up there obviously when I wrote the book, but I couldn't get into the vicarage, and apparently the people who live in the vicarage are regularly turning away people who want to just have peek inside.
I mean, the thing is that obviously we wanted a community which surrounded the church.
Yes.
We went to a vicarage in Oxford and did the usual things facing what we went to London, but of course Great Worley now is a sprawl. There's no real identity. Yes, the church is still there, but the rest of it.
Its main identity is where you pay the money on the M6 toll road.
Yeah, that's
I remember when I drove up there from Asia, I would stop from there. It said Great Worley toll or something like that.